Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna of Russia was the fifth child and only surviving daughter of Emperor Alexander II of Russia and his first wife, Princess Marie of Hesse by Rhine. She was the younger sister of Emperor Alexander III of Russia and a paternal aunt of Russia's last emperor, Nicholas II. In 1874, Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna married Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, the second son of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom and Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. She was the first and only Romanov to marry into the British royal family. The couple had 5 children, a son, Alfred, and 4 daughters, Marie, Victoria, Melita, Alexandra, and Beatrice. For the first years of her marriage, Maria Alexandrovna lived in England. She neither adapted to the British court nor overcame her dislike for her adopted country. She accompanied her husband on his postings as an admiral of the Royal Navy at Malta and Devonport. The Duchess of Edinburgh travelled extensively through Europe. She visited her family in Russia frequently and stayed for long periods in England and Germany, attending social and family events. In August 1893, Maria Alexandrovna became Duchess of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha when her husband inherited the duchy on the death of his childless uncle, Ernest II, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. She enjoyed life in Germany where she was active in cultural endeavors and charitable work. To her daughters, she gave all her support, but she was critical of her wayward son who died young in 1899. Her husband died the following year. In her widowhood, Maria Alexandrovna continued to live in Coburg. The outbreak of World War I divided her sympathies. She sided with Germany against her native Russia. Her only surviving brother, Grand Duke Paul, her nephews Tsar Nicholas II and many other relatives were killed during the Russian Revolution, and she lost her considerable fortune. From 1893 until her death, she had the distinction of being a Russian Grand Duchess, a British Princess and Royal Duchess, and the consort of a German sovereign duke. After World War I, Saxe-Coburg Gotha, the Grand Duchy her husband and nephew had ruled, ceased to exist in November 1918. Maria Alexandrovna died 2 years later while living under reduced circumstances in exile in Switzerland. Grand Duchess of Russia. Early life. Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna was born the 17th of October 1853 at the Alexander Palace in Saxe-Coburg. She was the 6th child and only surviving daughter among the 8 children of Emperor Alexander II of Russia and his wife Empress Maria Alexandrovna of Russia, acute Duchess Maximilian Wilhelmine of Hesse-Darmstadt. At the time of her birth, her father, Emperor Nicholas I of Russia, was on the throne and her father was Tsarevich. In 1855, when Maria Alexandrovna was 17 months old, Nicholas I died and her father became the new Russian emperor. The Grand Duchess grew up as the only girl with 4 older brothers and 2 younger ones. She did not know her only sister, Grand Duchess Alexandra Alexandrovna of Russia, who had died before she was born. Maria Alexandrovna herself almost died from a throat disease at the age of 7. Her childhood was spent in luxury and splendor in the large palaces and country estates owned by the Romanovs. The family's main residence was the 1,600-room Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, with another residence at Gatchina, 40 miles south. In the summer, the family stayed in Peterhof, a large complex with farms, cottages, and various pavilions on the Gulf of Finland. For the end of the summer until winter, the imperial family moved to Saxe-Coburg, the royal village, where the Romanovs had the Catherine Palace and Alexander Palace. In the Children's Island, located in a pond in the park of the Alexander Palace, Maria Alexandrovna had her own private little house, off-limit to adults, which she used with her brothers as a playhouse. Her father added a farm, built for her enjoyment. Both parents doted on her. The Tsar Alexander II. She was her favorite child and he enjoyed spending time with her. The Empress was a loving mother, but physically cold towards her children. The Tsarina suffered from weak lungs and had to travel constantly to Germany and southern Europe to escape the harsh Russian winters. The Tsarina often took her 3 younger children with her on these trips. As a consequence, Maria Alexandrovna became closer to her 2 younger brothers, Grand Duke Sergei and Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich, than to her older siblings. Surrounded only by brothers, Maria grew up as a tomboy, with an independent character and a strong will. Education. Maria was educated at the Russian court under the strict regime of her governess, Countess Alexandrine Tolstoy. Maria Alexandrovna was the first Russian Grand Duchess to be raised by English nannies and to speak fluent English. Besides her native Russian, she also became totally proficient in German, French, and English. In August 1867, while the imperial family was at Novadia Palace in Crimea, Mark Twain met Maria Alexandrovna and her parents. The famous American writer described her as blue-eyed, unassuming, and pretty. As many contemporaries did, Twain noticed the influence that the young Grand Duchess had over her father. She is absolutely genuine and never changes in front of strangers, observed her maid Nirvana Anna Tyacheva, a daughter of the celebrated poet Fyodor Tyachev, adding that she is accustomed to be the center of the world and that everyone yields to her. Tyacheva described her pupil as stubborn and uncompromising, commenting that one cannot treat her roughly or reason with her a lot. Engagement. Meeting Prince Alfred during a visit to her maternal relatives at Guggenheim in the summer of 1868, Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, then 15 years old, met Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Alfred, Queen Victoria's second son, was a shy and handsome young man, with a career in the British Navy. He was visiting his sister, Princess Alice, who was married to Maria Alexandrovna's first cousin. Alfred's voyage around the world with the Royal Navy kept him away, traveling for the next 2 years. Maria and Prince Alfred saw each other again in the summer 1871, when Alexander II and his wife visited relatives at Schloss Heiligenberg. The Tsar and his wife were accompanied by 17-year-old Maria and her 2 elder brothers. Alfred also happened to be there, along with the Prince and Princess of Wales. During that summer, Maria and Alfred felt attracted to each other, spending the days walking and talking together. They had a common love of music. Alfred was an enthusiastic amateur violinist, while Maria played the piano. Although they wished to marry, no engagement was announced, and Alfred returned to England. The parents were against the match. Alexander II did not want to lose his daughter, to whom he was deeply attached. The Tsar also objected to a British son-in-law, due to the general anti-English feeling in Russia following the Crimean War. The Tsarina regarded the British customs as peculiar and the English people as cold and unfriendly. She was convinced that her daughter would not be happy there. However, marriage negotiation began in July 1871, only to be stalled in 1872. Negotiations. Queen Victoria was also against the match. No British prince had ever married a Romanov, and she foresaw problems with Maria's Orthodox religion and Russian upbringing. The Queen considered that Russia was generally unfriendly towards Britain. Victoria was also suspicious about Russian moves in the direction of India. The Queen was dismayed, therefore, when she heard that official negotiations had restarted in January 1873. There were rumors going about St. Petersburg that Maria Alexandrovna had compromised herself with Prince Golitsyn, the Tsar's aide-de-camp, and her family were anxious to see her settled. Alfred refused to believe those rumors and he was prepared to fight to marry the person he loved. Queen Victoria therefore swallowed her pride and said nothing. Both mothers continued to look for other partners for the children, but Alfred and Maria would not have anyone else. As the Tsarina failed to find a German prince acceptable for her daughter, a meeting among Alfred, the Tsarina and her daughter took place in Sorrento, Italy in mid-April 1873. That year, there was an Anglo-Russian dispute over the Afghan border. The Queen's ministers thought that a marriage might help to ease the tension between the two countries, if only by putting the monarchs into closer contact with one another. In July 1873, Alfred went to Guggenheim to meet the Tsar. On the 11th of July, he asked for Maria Alexandrovna's hand and she accepted him. He was nearly 29, she was 19. He sent a telegram from Germany back to his mother: "Maria and I were engaged this morning. Cannot say how happy I am. Hope your blessing rests on us." The Queen sent her congratulations, but confined her misgivings to her diary on the 11th of July 1873, not knowing Marie, and realizing that there may still be many difficulties. "My thoughts and feelings are rather mixed." Quote, when breaking the news to her eldest daughter, Crown Princess Victoria of Prussia, Queen Victoria simply said, "The murder is out." Dowry Tsar Alexander II granted his daughter the then staggering sum of £100,000 as a dowry, plus an annual allowance of £32,000. He also bestowed upon his only daughter some of the best jewels owned by the Romanovs, including the sapphires he had inherited from his mother Empress Alexandra Feodorovna, as well as a parure that had belonged to Catherine the Great. As a wedding present, the Tsar commissioned a spectacular complete parure of diamonds and Burmese rubies from the court jeweler Bolan. Her other pieces of jewelry included a tiara russe made of diamonds, which could also be worn as a necklace. On his part, Alfred was made honorary chief of a Russian Guards regiment and even had a Russian battleship named after him, the Herzog Edinburgh. A week after the engagement, the proposed Anglo-Russo alliance experienced its first crisis. Queen Victoria asked the Tsar to bring Maria to Scotland, so that she could meet her future daughter-in-law. Alexander II refused. The Tsarina suggested that they all meet in Cologne instead. The Queen called it simply impertinent that I, who have been nearly 20 years longer on the throne than the Emperor of Russia, and who am a reigning sovereign, should be ready to run to the slightest call of the mighty Russians. Like any little princess, Victoria also made herself unpopular by refusing the Tsar's offer to make the Prince of Wales colonel of a Russian regiment, and by demanding that an Anglican marriage service be held in St. Petersburg alongside the Orthodox ceremony. But Maria Alexandrovna looked forward happily to her marriage. "How happy I am to belong to him. I feel that my love for him is growing daily. I have a feeling of peace and inexpressible happiness and a boundless impatience to be altogether his own." Marriage. On the 4th of January 1874, Alfred arrived in St. Petersburg for the wedding and stayed in the Winter Palace. The other British guests arrived on the 18th of January. The wedding was celebrated in great splendor at the Church of the Winter Palace on the 23rd of January 1874. Queen Victoria was represented by her eldest son Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, and his wife Alexandra, Princess of Wales, sister of Tsarevna Maria Feodorovna of Russia. The Queen's eldest daughter, Victoria, and her husband Frederick, Crown Prince of Germany, were present as well. The marriage ceremony consisted of two parts. The Orthodox service took place first and was performed by the Metro metropolitans of St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Kiev in the Imperial Chapel. Grand Dukes Vladimir Alexis and Serge and the groom's brother Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Strathearn, relieved each other, taking turns holding the golden crowns over the head of the bride and groom. Maria wore a glittering coronet on a mantle of crimson velvet trimmed with ermine and a sprig of myrtle, specially sent by Queen Victoria. Alfred wore the uniform of the Royal Navy. The Tsar looked pale throughout the entire ceremony and said afterwards, "It is for her happiness, but the light of my life has gone out." After this, the bride and groom each drank thrice from a goblet of wine. The service concluded with the couple joining hands under the priest's stole. Then they all proceeded to the Blue Drawing Room, where Arthur Stanley, Dean of Westminster, made Prince Alfred and Maria Alexandrovna man and wife according to the rites of the Church of England. In London that night, Queen Victoria wore the Order of St. Catherine on her dress and drank a toast to the young couple. Those members of her court who had travelled to St. Petersburg were overwhelmed by the scale of the celebrations, receptions and entertainments marking the Anglo-Russian marriage. Major General Sir Howard Elphinstone noted that, in one room, supper was served to 500 people at 50 different tables, with palms and exotics, used to so large an extent that it gives the place the appearance of a conservatory. The heat of the rooms was almost unbearable, and several ladies left the ballroom in a fainting state. Lady Augusta Stanley summed up the wedding in 3 words: "What a day!" Alfred and Maria spent the wedding night at the Alexander Palace in Saxe-Coburg. Alexander II had ordered a lavish honeymoon suite on the ground floor, hoping that it would persuade the young couple to remain in Russia. After a short honeymoon in Saxe-Coburg, however, Alfred and Maria left Russia to live in England. Alexander II never lost hope that they would return, and the honeymoon suite was kept preserved for the couple for 2 decades. It later became the bedroom of the last Tsar, Nicholas II, and his wife, Alexandra, in 1894. Duchess of Edinburgh. Arrival in England. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh arrived in England on the 7th of March 1874. The town of Windsor was decorated in their honor, with Union Jacks and Russian flags, and Maria was given a great welcome by the waiting crowds. Queen Victoria met them at the Southwestern Station and recorded their arrival in her journal. "I took dear Marie in my arms and kissed her warmly several times. I was quite nervous and trembling, so long had I been in expectation. Dear Marie has a very friendly manner, a pleasant face, beautiful skin and fine bright eyes. She speaks English wonderfully well." Later on, Queen Victoria described her new daughter-in-law as most pleasing, natural, unaffected and civil, even if she was not pretty or graceful and held herself badly. "I have formed a high opinion of her," Queen Victoria reported, impressed with her wonderfully even, cheerful, satisfied temper, her kind and indulgent disposition, free from bigotry and intolerance, and her serious, intelligent mind, so entirely free from everything fast, and so full of occupation and interest in everything, makes her a most agreeable companion. Everyone must like her. The Queen also noted that Marie was not a bit afraid of Alfie, and I hope will have the very best influence upon him. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh made the public entry into London on the 12th of March. Alfred and Maria moved into Clarence House in London, which was the main residence in England. In addition, they had a country residence, East Well Park, a large estate of 2,500 acres near Ashford in Kent, where the Duke enjoyed shooting parties. To alleviate his daughter's homesickness, the Tsar and his son Grand Duke Alexei paid a family visit to England in May 1874. Maria arrived in England with the intention of making a success of her life in her adopted country, but she found difficult to settle at the British court. For her, the climate was detestable, and the food bland. She found Clarence House, her London home, gloomy. She described London as an impossible place, where people are mad of pleasure and are let down compared to the broad streets, golden domes, and magnificent palaces of St. Petersburg. In her eyes, Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle could never compete with the splendours of the Winter Palace. Constant visits to her mother-in-law at Windsor Castle and Osborne in the Isle of Wight were tedious. The Queen's company was oppressive, the late nights were tiring, and her husband was a philanderer. Of her sisters and brothers-in-law, she only cared for the two youngest, Prince Leopold and Princess Beatrice. Proud of her strong intellect, she considered Alexandra, the Princess of Wales, a light-minded and foolish woman. Although she loved music, the Duchess did not like the Royal Albert Hall, describing it as all ecclesiastical and quite boring. Every concert goes on for several hours. When she visited Scotland, Maria Alexandrovna was frozen in her unheated bedroom in Balmoral Castle and ordered a fire to be lit. When she was out, Queen Victoria entered the room and ordered a maid to throw water on the fire and open all the windows. The Duchess said that she might as well live on an iceberg, and was soon writing letters home to her father describing Queen Victoria as a silly, obstinate old fool, disenchanted with Britain and life with her difficult mother-in-law. The Duchess of Edinburgh became increasingly homesick for Russia and was happy for any excuse to return there. British people thought her rough and masculine in her manners. Her imperious attitude towards her servants and her defiance of English convention by smoking in public made her unpopular. She made it equally plain that she did not care what people thought. The Duchess and Queen Victoria. The Duchess often squabbled with her mother-in-law on how she should be addressed at court. As the Tsar's only daughter, Maria Alexandrovna had precedence over all the Grand Duchesses in Russia. She therefore deeply resented having to give precedence in England to the Princess of Wales. From her birth, Maria Alexandrovna was an Imperial Highness as the daughter of an emperor. However, once she married her husband, she was only entitled to the style of Royal Highness. Tsar Alexander II alleged that his daughter should continue to be styled as an Imperial Highness, not royal, as in all civilized countries. Queen Victoria replied that she did not care whether imperial was used or not, as long as royal came first. There was also the added problem that Maria was both Duchess of Edinburgh and Grand Duchess of Russia, and which title should be written first. In retaliation for the quarrel over precedence, the Duchess of Edinburgh took great pleasure in showing off her magnificent jewellery. The English princesses were clearly jealous of her diamonds, as was Queen Victoria. Muriel Buchanan, daughter of the last British ambassador to Imperial Russia, described Maria's first drawing room. The Queen compared the Duchess's tiara with those of her own daughters, shrugging her shoulders like a bird whose plumage has been ruffled, her mouth drawn down at the corners, in an expression which those who knew her had learned to dread. At the British court, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh quickly started a family. Just 9 months after the marriage, the Duchess gave birth to a son, young Alfred, born in Buckingham Palace on the 15th of October 1874. The Tsarina came to London to visit her daughter during her confinement and to meet her grandson. In the following years, the family kept growing. Her daughter was born on the 29th of October 1875 at Eastwell Park. She was named Marie, after her mother and grandmother. Maria shocked English society by nursing the children herself. The family's main residence in England was Clarence House, in London. Autumns, Christmas and New Year were spent at Eastwell Park, a country estate they leased in Kent. On summer holidays, the family went to Osborne Cottage on the Isle of Wight, while the Duchess was in Malta, accompanied her husband, who was stationed there as an officer in the Royal Navy. Maria Alexandrovna gave birth to a second daughter, Victoria Melita, on the 25th of November 1876. After the return to the sojourn in Malta in 1877, Russia went to war with Turkey in an attempt to gain control of the Balkans. Queen Victoria sent Tsar Alexander II a series of aggressive telegrams that almost led to a state of war between the two countries. The Duchess was deeply shocked at her mother-in-law's hostility towards her country and her own father in particular. The relationship between the Duchess of Edinburgh and her mother-in-law deteriorated. Maria Alexandrovna became an Anglophone. The Duke of Edinburgh was the heir of his childless uncle Ernest II, Duke of Saxe-Coburg, the eldest brother of Prince Alfred. After the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878, for a long while, Maria Alexandrovna resided in Coburg, as her husband was expected to succeed his aging uncle. While in Germany, a third daughter, Alexandra, was born on 1 September 1878 at Rosenau Castle, in Coburg. On 13 October 1879 the Duchess gave birth prematurely to a stillborn son at Eastwell Park. On 17 February 1880, Maria was back in Russia, during the 25th anniversary celebration of her father's coronation. That day, radicals attempted to assassinate the Tsar and the entire imperial family. A terrorist bomb demolished the dining room and the guard room at the Winter Palace. Maria Alexandrovna returned to Russia again in June 1880, to be with her dying mother. She was back in England at Clarence House when her father was killed by a terrorist bomb. Maria Alexandrovna had to rush back to Russia to attend her father's funeral in St. Petersburg in March 1881. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh were present at the coronation of her brother, Tsar Alexander III, in Moscow in May 1883. The family was completed with the birth of a fourth daughter, Princess Beatrice, born at Eastwell on 20 April 1884. Years later, the Duchess lamented her failure to have more children. The only real heavenly moment is the birth of the child. This cannot be compared to anything else. I think if I had even a dozen children I would have kept the same feeling." Quote. In July 1884, they traveled to Ilinska, outside Moscow, to visit Maria's younger brother Grand Duke Sergei, who had married Queen Victoria's granddaughter Elizabeth of Hesse. Alfred was heir to the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Expecting to be the Duchess there, Maria Alexandrovna had a palace built for her family in Coburg. The building, known as the Edinburgh Palais, was built across the central square from the Schloss Ehrenburg, the official residence of the reigning duke, and next to the town's opera hall. The royal couple's rooms were on the second floor, while the bedrooms of the four young princesses were on the third floor. Both the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh were avid collectors. In the Edinburgh Palais, there were many objects that reminded Maria Alexandrovna of her homeland. As a reminder of Russia, Maria Alexandrovna organized entertainment in the Russian fashion. In Malta in January 1886, the Duke was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the British Mediterranean Fleet, based in Malta. In October 1886, the family settled there. For the next 3 years, the family spent every winter at the San Anton Palace in Malta. Life in the island was unexciting for the Duchess of Edinburgh, but it was a welcome respite from living in England. While in Malta, the Duchess proved to be an excellent hostess, entertaining naval officers and their wives. In 1887, the couple returned briefly to London to take part in Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. Her husband's career in the British Navy and the many relations in the European courts allowed Maria Alexandrovna to travel extensively, something that she truly enjoyed. She visited most European countries, including Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, Greece, and even Montenegro, making annual trips to Germany. Germany, England, and Russia.